For those of you who didn't join the one last month, these sessions are all about Ivan and I wanting to support leaders as they continue to tackle a lot of challenges and accumulating challenges with COVID and lots of people taking on more and more responsibility along with those challenges. So that's what prompted our wanting to do these sessions. And so what you'll find, and this is another reason why we sent out the handout so that you have that. We're gonna fly through a couple of core principles so that those of you who are new to the Wingspan system, you can catch on to some of the language that we're using. And then we want to jump into your situations. We want this to be as valuable and relevant to all of you who are attending.
And highly interactive.
Yeah.
So it's not us just talking, it's you guys bringing in, hey, this is what's happening, or this is where I'm having a hard time, or how do I say no to this?
Yeah.
That'll be really good.
Yeah. One of the things that even last time, 4 different people reached out to me because they appreciated so much what Heather had shared in terms of things that she was practicing. And so this is definitely an exchange and a collaboration. And that's why we make everyone a panelist.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive right in. You can raise your hand the old-fashioned way. You can just jump in without raising your hand. I'd rather us be interrupting each other than for it to be quiet crickets on the other line. So here we go.
All right. So what we're going to start off with today is these background slides for all you guys to hold on to. So if you're not familiar with Kathy and I, here's a little bit of background on us. We won't go into a whole lot of that. And for those of you who, again, are new to us, what we do at Wingspan is we help folks all kinds of leadership positions, from CEOs down to first line leaders, and lots of individual contributors and entrepreneurs with their behavioral performance and their communication. So oftentimes what we realize is people have gone through lots of experiences and they get to the point where they're running a team or they're in charge of a group and they're like, wow, I haven't been formally trained on how to do some of these things. And so it's a great way to help provide those tools and sharpen things up so that people can be far more deliberate and effective with what they're going for. So in our process today, what we're going to be doing is starting off with is identifying things right out of the gate. So as we go through this, again, when you identify things, please do jump in and share that with us, because that helps us know that this is clicking for you guys. And also, as you recognize, oh gosh, I'm doing this, and identify that, that's going to help others learn from your learning as well and with what you're sharing. So we're going to talk about identifying where you're in the stress zone, are you getting overextended, overcommitted, when you may be in autopilot. So as a reminder, and we'll get into this a little later, autopilot is where you're doing things because you've always probably done them that way. And it's a habit that worked well in one situation, and now it can be working against you or slowing you down. Also identify some of the payoff and cost of things. So with any pattern or behavior we have, it's important to think about, what's the payoff and cost of this? And we'll get into some examples of that. So once we've identified things, then we're going to go into clarifying some of the aspects around that pattern or that habit. And that's going to include things like, what's my mindset about responsibility? How am I thinking about which parts of this responsibility actually belong to me versus perhaps belong to somebody else? And then also clarifying, how can I say no so that I'm clear about the contribution, the role, the value I actually bring to this organization? Because saying yes to everything is going to really begin to dilute that. And then through this also, we'll jump into some practice. So we'll help you guys with some examples of really specific language that will help you strengthen your part in how you're performing and working with others. And also give you some tools to help you prioritize, qualify, and make better decisions. And this will lead into some ways that you guys can have really solid ongoing practice. So if at any point we give an example or say something and you're thinking, oh yeah, that's really good, I want to get that, and you didn't get all of it down, don't hesitate to say to us, hey, will you say that again? Or, hey, how would you say that with this kind of a situation? We get that a lot in sessions, and that's something we're really used to doing.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So as a bit of backdrop for those who are new to us and as a refresh for everyone else, when we talk about comprehensive performance today, one of the things that's important that we do that's a little bit different is we say comprehensive performance is both your technical performance, which is what most of you are used to thinking about. That's the what you do, the results you create. So that can be things like, I'm going to close the month-end books. I'm going to manufacture a particular product. I'm going to develop a process or run payroll. That's going to be different than your behavioral performance. So that's really the how you're doing these things. It's really the relationships that you're creating as you're working with others. So the how you do it is going to be driven by how you're communicating, how you're thinking, how you're owning and initiating or making decisions each day. So there's a whole stack of things in there. We want to provide that as a quick way to help people shift from the what I'm doing into the how I'm doing it. So if it feels a little bit different as we're going through the conversation today, that's perfectly normal. We see that with a lot of leaders.
Yeah. So when you hear us talking about performance or how you're performing, how we use that term is how are you showing up in all parts of your life, and how are you looking at things? How are you thinking about things? How you're interacting with people. So it's how you are creating all of your experiences, which is way beyond the technical of what you do in your day-to-day work.
Yeah. The next piece from this is going to be, this is our overview diagram. So as you look at this again, for those who are new to Wingspan, or those who are perhaps somewhat practiced, this is our overview diagram. And at the top part, this is where,
and I wouldn't even spend too much time on here. We're going to be referring to this. So we're going to be referring back to this as we go over a couple of things. So even if you, Ivan, if you just want to go over the zones.
Yeah.
So right now, the bottom portion with the powerful partnering, don't worry about that too much. We're going to focus primarily on the top of the diagram today.
Good call. So for the top piece, again, really quickly, when we're operating from one of three places, and that's either going to be autopilot zone, performance zone, or stress zone. When we're in the performance zone, that's when our intensity is at from what we like to think of as a 1 through a 10, where we are being deliberate, we're being intentional, we're really choosing what we're doing and how we're working with others. If we get really stressed, that's where we stop working from our performance zone, and we're literally working with a different part of our brains. And so we're going to bring a different mindset. We're going to bring different behaviors and different communications into our interactions with others when we're working from stress. And just like that, when we're working in autopilot, this is where perhaps we've gotten so good at something that we stop really thinking about it, and we just do it this way because I've always done it that way, or that's what's always worked well. And so we're literally also not thinking about it because we're so used to just following this particular playbook or this particular process. So autopilot doesn't mean that you don't care. Can mean that you've gotten so good at something that you stop paying attention and you're just running the same routine, oftentimes not recognizing that the other players or the situation has evolved a little bit and changed. And so your normally really good process may not be quite as good as it used to be.
So a couple of things I'm going to add to that. When we are working from our personal performance zone, and this is moment to moment, it's not all the time, or it's not every, day to day. It's in every single moment. When we as human beings are working from our personal performance zone, let's put some descriptors on that. So think about how you feel when you're working from your personal performance zone. So for some of you, how would you describe how you feel when you're in your personal performance zone? Just throw them out there. Powerful.
Nice.
Energized. I was just going to say that too.
Energized. Another powerful. Good. Who else?
Content.
Intense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Content.
Content. Ooh,
yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Confident.
Confident.
Good. Really
yes.
It's easier to make decisions in the performance zone.
Clarity. Maybe
or decisive.
Yeah. Decisive.
Yeah.
Clear. Yeah. Curious, courageous. When we're in our personal performance zone, this is when we're highly productive. And I'm sure Linda's smiling at this one. And this is where we are getting things done, making decisions from a place of self-leadership. And so now when we're up in the stress zone, here are a couple of descriptors around the stress zone. When we're in the stress zone, our performance is counterproductive versus when we're in autopilot, our performance is unproductive. Those are two very different things. So up in the stress zone, our physical, mental, and emotional energy is really high. And a lot of times we're creating things in our business and in our life. We're creating things unintentionally and sometimes regretfully. When we're down in autopilot, we're also creating things. Here's some descriptors for autopilot. In addition to unproductive, habitual, passive, regurgitating, coasting, sometimes clueless. We really are unaware or hypo-aware. Whereas up in the stress zone, we're hyper-aware. We're really keyed in on something typically. And then in the performance zone is when we're aware, intentional, purposeful, deliberate. We're really exercising healthy control. So I want to make sure that we have those descriptors as we go into the next exercises around setting boundaries and saying no.
Cool. So if you've got this page printed out, and if you don't know SWET, you may just want to jot down some notes on a piece of paper and define them in terms of stress zone and then autopilot in a different category. That's going to help as we're going through this. Again, team members on this call may identify things and you go, that does sound kind of familiar. Let me make a note about that. So part of your learning today will be on this call. Part of it will definitely be from what other team members are bringing into this conversation. And part of it will definitely happen afterwards too, when you reflect and think about this, or later on as you have conversations or experiences, you may begin to reframe those and think about them through this lens.
So now let's take a few minutes on number one. When are you in the stress zone? And then if you either turn off the slides so we can just see one another and have a conversation. So again, take a few moments and think about when do you tend to get overcommitted? Or maybe who are you interacting with when you go into the stress zone? Because maybe you're afraid of saying no. Or in what particular situations do I get really stressed and then I overextend myself or I overcommit?
And some of these may be family, or even if you're working on a not-for-profit group or you're in a club, it can be in those situations too. So don't just think of it in the work context. It can be any part of your life.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think for me, my people who stress me out, typically are the authority figures. Tend to overanalyze and try and search for the right answer instead of asking questions and being kind of centered. And then consequently, I think autopilot for me is my direct reports. I'll just go straight to just giving them the answer to go on about my day and not necessarily engage them with active language or advancing questions at all. And that's, I think I'm becoming more and more aware, but I can tell it's still as more and more work and responsibility is coming forward, that's also intensifying.
You're bringing up so many good things there, Matt. One of the things, so first of all, it's super helpful for every single one of you to identify the who. When you're interacting with certain people, there are going to be some patterns there, and that's really important information for you. The other thing that Matt identified is he says, when I'm searching for the right answer. And so when we're, for many of us, when we're focused on our technical performance, what we do, technically speaking, like Chris and your team, when you're working with numbers, there's often a right answer. However, on the other side, or at the same time, on the behavioral side of performance, there is no right answer. And so one way that Matt was identifying, and many leaders do, when we're searching for the right answer on the behavior side of things, there is no right answer. So we contribute, unknowingly, we contribute to our own stress. going up into stress. Mhm. Yeah, really good. How about someone else? What's coming to mind when you answer these questions for yourself?
Stress zone, I would say definitely I call it an illusion of multitasking. Just when you're trying to handle too many things, even like two things at once, it often doesn't work out. At least for myself, you really can't do 100% on two different things, and then always a third thing will pile in, a fourth thing. And right now for myself and some others, in the house hunt, so you're out looking for houses and doing tours, but then you're looking at your phone because you're still working and getting the emails, and you're trying to balance kids and family and work and everything at once, and then you're just overwhelmed.
Yeah, and Kyle, you're gonna jump in?
Well, no, go ahead. I'll hop in a second.
Well, Kyle, what you're bringing up is something that, so when you look back, can you bring up the zones? So for those of you who are new, and again, a refresher for some of you, the very top of the stress zone. So Kyle, what you're describing is you're running 200 miles an hour, you're doing 10 things at any given time, and you get yourself up into the stress zone. Well, the very top of stress actually overlaps with the very bottom of autopilot. And so what you're describing is when we're in that combination of those two. And so similar with what Matt was describing, actually, when he's running really fast and then his direct reports come to him, instead of him helping his direct reports solve their own problems, then Matt's just giving them the answers. And so Kyle, what you're talking about too is often you might be, it sounds like, in the habit of that illusion of multitasking, and then you're doing 10 things at once. And then of course, when we're running 100 miles an hour, a lot of us can be in the habit of saying yes, or sometimes it's a default yes because we're not saying no. So now we're in the habit of it, which just compounds the stress and gets you further and further down that road. And so again, think about the very top of that stress zone folding over, and it overlaps with the very bottom of autopilot. Okay, I would stop sharing. What else are all of you identifying? When do you get up into the stress zone?
I said when I have like a sudden or unexpected accumulation of things. So if you're in your routine and you're in your performance zone, just sort of chugging along, but all of a sudden high priority items accumulate all at once. I find that pretty stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that as well too. And I find myself falling into the trap of the more of those high priority items stack up, the less organized I get. I stop taking notes and I stop keeping a checklist, and it just goes into pure firefighting mode from then on out, and helps drive the stress zone even further.
Yeah, that's exactly the same for me. And then I feel like it's a good combination with Kyle's point he brought up. Then I'm trying to just tackle them all at the same time, and obviously don't get anything really done in the time frame that I would have gotten it done if I just like looked at them one after the other. But yeah, that's definitely an issue for me, that I have a harder time when it's unforeseen items that pile up, to just get them in order right away and to make a quick decision on what's the highest priority right now, and really tackle them one after the other instead of just looking at all at the same time.
Yeah, so you're bringing up a really good point too, the three of you, again, because oftentimes when we're identifying when we go up into the stress zone, it's related to when we're also in autopilot, because either a habit can get us up into the stress zone, or we get up into the stress zone and then we resort back to a habit. And so something really important for all of you to note is not only when, it's how often
Who is
How-
it with?
Yeah, who is it with? So identifying these patterns actually give you really useful information for then what you're going to practice instead. And we're going to get to that for sure. Good. One more person. When do you find that you're up in the stress zone or down? Some of you are already identifying down in autopilot.
Well, in my case, I would say when you have difficulties completing your work, and when that work is really important and depends on third parties or another people involved, and to deal with their attitude. I mean, when they don't have the best attitude to help you or support you, it's like really.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Paula. I've tend myself entering the stress zone when we have urgent matters that involve multiple parties to get the action resolved. Being in a company as big as Siemens, there's a lot of players that need to check boxes before we can usually perform and provide the documentation or the invoice or the purchase order needed. So just kind of getting the buy-in from everyone and knowing that there's going to be some people that aren't necessarily as easy to work with as others. And it makes our job more difficult because sometimes we're trying to do other people's job to get something urgent done that we necessarily wouldn't be trying to do if it wasn't on fire. So.
Got it. I'm making a special note of that one too, Robert, the doing other people's job, because that is a part of that setting boundaries, saying no. We also start to get into accountability, which we'll cover on another session. Mm-hmm. So as all of you are identifying, notice that on some level, you've known that you you've known like when you're up in the stress zone or when you tend to be down in autopilot, or what your tendencies are when you're in autopilot. And we usually also don't slow down to maybe get angry enough or disappointed enough to actually do something different and to decide that we're worth doing it differently. Mm-hmm. So one of the important things for every single one of you to also identify is, how is this costing you? And I'm not saying how is it costing the business. I'm saying, how is it costing you when you're in the stress zone or in autopilot?
Costing a lot of sanity.
Yeah. I think I'm also much less productive.
Peace of mind and accumulation of tasks.
And then how do you tend to feel, Paula, when that happens?
Like kind of angry in some cases.
Yeah, for sure. Which I'm just going to sneak it in here right now. So those
more anxious.
Yeah, anxious for sure. Now, and this is another reason why I was pressing Paula to get more descriptive about how she feels. How each of you feel when you're in these situations is highly informative.
Yeah.
Your emotions have information, and a big part of what we do, and Paula, I'm so glad that you were honest enough to say, I'm angry, or I get angry when I'm there, because a lot of times we learn in some BS manager training or whatever, like, well, don't get angry, or you're not supposed to be angry, or whatever, be positive. And we, of course, I call that BS, because as human beings, how we perform in every single moment, our emotions are a huge factor. Our emotions are a primal navigational system for us. Yeah. And so if you find that you're angry or resentful, or even when you start to find that you're aggravated or frustrated, like Robert, you were saying, doing other people's job, I would be very angry if I was spending my time doing other people's job. It has really, really good information for you to pay attention to.
It also going to be the easiest way for you to know that something isn't like something doesn't feel right, because that's what you literally is. This doesn't feel right when I have this, or when I have these kinds of conversations with this person, it something doesn't sit well with me. That can be one of your first indicators that something is off. So again, that emotion you feel is going to be that first kind of little click of, hey, something's off a bit. So when you start to feel that for yourself, don't swat it away or ignore it. That's a great time to sit down and say, okay, well, what's happening that I'm feeling this way? Oh, I'm feeling peeved because this is the third time I've had this conversation with this person and they're not doing their part. This is the fourth time this month this person's come to ask me to finish their thing because they haven't adequately put enough time aside to do it. So yeah, it makes sense that I'm frustrated, because that it gives you not only that warning light indicator on your own personal dashboard, it also helps you start to pull that back and say, well, what's underneath this? What's driving this? Because as you get to that, it helps you be really equipped for conversations with yourself and conversations with others in really clear and descriptive ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that piece that Ivan's talking about, which is going to be a tool for all of you, and leaders who are working with us know it. It's paying far more attention to how you feel, so that when you feel frustrated or you start to get annoyed, you can catch it early and you've got more creative control, rather than waiting until you are angry
Or suppressing, which doesn't work.
Yeah.
Just shove that down. Don't worry about that. And then it keeps boiling. And then you've lost the time and lost really your mental capacity to say, okay, I'm starting to feel this way. How do I want to head this off so I can catch it early and then begin to bring myself down and step back and more rationally, more intentionally work through this to figure out what in the heck is going on.
Yeah. So a practice for sure. Yeah, Linda?
Yeah.
No, I was thinking, like Ivan's saying, is that when things start to boil up, boil over, you have a lot of stress. Sometimes you don't have time, or you feel you don't have time because you're in stress to take care of some of the things, so they just get worse and worse. So when you're at that highest end of stress, what happens to me, and I think maybe some other people too, is I either get really tired, feel like I'm going to fall asleep, or I feel paralyzed, and then nothing gets done.
Yeah.
That's exactly. So, and Linda, yes, that happens to so many people, because that's part of what our brains are designed to do. So our brains and our bodies are designed to do sometimes, like shut down, where you go into that. So that's another thing that I'm so glad you're bringing this up. And then of course that can, if we don't understand that is a very a deliberately designed,
The natural response.
a natural response. Yeah. If we don't understand that, well, then we can further beat ourselves up about it. And then we just can continue the cycle. And then sometimes we get exhausted and then we check out and we're like, screw it. Except then it happens again. And so that's why, again, it's important that you're all identifying when you're in stress and then when you're in autopilot, because a lot of times we're in that overlap. Exactly what you're describing, Linda.
Well, and you really hit on something key with we'll get stressed, and I've been this way. And afterwards, when I look at it, I just have to laugh at myself. And I'm going to share this, and I'm sure other people realize this too. I'll care about something, and I really care, and I'll get stressed out. Be like, I can't believe this isn't happening. And then I don't know what happens. 30 seconds later, I'm like, yeah, screw it. And if I step back, I'm like, how in the heck did I make the leap from I care about this so much to, yeah, forget it, whatever, just blow it off? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so what's happening is, we call it going over the back. I've gone so high in stress that I'll flip down in the autopilot. I'm like, well, just whatever. And that's where my brain is kicking into the fight, flight, or freeze. So if you've heard of that, this is how that's showing up for us. And what's important is that now that we're thinking about, I don't want to go to fight, flight, or freeze. Yeah, that helped us as humans hundreds of thousands of years ago not get eaten by tigers. Well, today it doesn't help us though figure out how to make good decisions with other team members, or how to get a project moving when it's stalled. So it's a great way to say, okay, I want to go in a more deliberate, intentional, more productive direction. So I'm going to begin to use those indicators to steer the ship in a different direction, steer myself in a different direction.
Yeah. So while Linda, you and others who have this similar thing happening, the first thing to start practicing is that compassion with yourself and remind yourself it's a completely natural way that your body and your brain are designed to support you when that happens. So, and because I want to make sure that you're not continuing the cycle or continuing to beat yourself up when that happens. And then the second thing for you to do, and anyone on Chris's team, you can ask Chris more about it, or you can send us notes about and ask more questions. It's something we call the 2-word check-in. And it's literally carving out 30 seconds. Maybe when you go fill up your water bottle. So every time you go fill up your water bottle, literally check in with yourself, physically, mentally, and emotionally, just like that intensity, autopilot, performance zone, stress zone, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Where am I right now? Right now, unfiltered, as colorful as possible. And the more that you exercise that throughout the day, then the more you support yourself in getting and then staying in the performance zone. Because again, let's say you go to fill up your water bottle after this and you find out now that you've been thinking about that one person at work, you're still a little pissed off. And so you check in with yourself, you're a little pissed off. And the second word is hope. Maybe you're pissed off and hopeful. It has important information for you. The other thing is when you catch things earlier, when you get aggravated, you can catch it before you get to angry. Because if you check in with yourself and you find that you're aggravated, then you can support yourself with some questions. All right, what's contributing to this? Who was I just interacting with, or what was I working on? And you give yourself information so that you can now get out ahead of it and do something different so that you don't continue going in that direction.
Payoff and cost.
No, past that here.
Okay, I'm going to jump right to clarify.
Yeah, jumping into clarifying. So when it comes to setting boundaries and saying no, there are several things that are core principles within the Wingspan performance system that we want you to write down and remind yourself and remind each other and keep in mind. And the first one is around responsibility. So write this down. I'm responsible for myself and I'm responsible to others. Something that a commonality with nearly every leader that we work with is they're high performing. We work with high performing leaders, or they're high achieving. And so a commonality is very quick to take on responsibility. Brandy's smiling. We often will take on responsibility that's not even ours. And so related to that, we get into a leadership role. We have responsibilities
later on. We'll get into leadership role. Yeah.
Yeah, later on.
Yeah.
So we take on bigger responsibility projects and things like that, though we've got team members. Because we have a tendency to take on responsibility that's not ours, we take on, like Robert, you were saying, you're doing someone else's job. Like you're literally physically taking on responsibility that doesn't belong to you. And so this is really important to start reminding yourself, I'm responsible for myself. I'm responsible to others. And for that to help you change how you're viewing this. The second thing for you to, and I know you're going to jump in on this one, second thing for you to keep in mind is that as you continue to mature as a professional and grow in your scope of responsibility and impact, well, let me step back. When we're more junior in our careers, saying yes is highly rewarded and recognized. And
we get promoted for that. We get bonuses for that. We get invited to more more prominent or more desired work because of that. So
Yeah. And so saying yes really had a big payoff for us, except as you continue to advance in your professional journey, now that high performer behavior becomes a bigger cost rather than a payoff. Because as you take on greater leadership responsibilities, your value and your significance in your organization includes you saying no. Because again, sometimes we grow up thinking, saying yes, I'm responsible. I want to be a good team player. I want to perform at my best. And
I want to do my part. I want to make sure I help out with this because this thing's important.
Yeah. And so we say yes, we say yes, we say yes. Except that's not your responsibility any longer. Your responsibility now includes saying no.
Yeah.
And determining when to say no and what to say no to, and practicing sometimes who to say no to. And then of course, how to do that. So what are some of the situations each of you have where, even learning some of this already, where do you find it more difficult to say no or set boundaries?
My boss for me. I'm
Really
sure it's probably
common.
the same for everybody else. Sorry, guys.
Well, so say a little bit more about that, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging because you fall into the trap, like what Ivan had mentioned, is being rewarded for not saying no. So feeling like you're trying to be a good soldier for the team. So going above and beyond, taking on extra stuff to prove that you're ready for that next step. I feel like that's a trap that I've easily fallen into.
Mm-hmm. Who else has a hard show of hands? Who else has a hard time saying no to their manager? Yeah.
Somewhat good.
Yeah. Brandy, you were going to jump in?
Chris's direct reports are okay because we know we have his full support, and we know, like, if we actually have something to raise attention to, like, he will try to find a different solution. But I had the perfect example in my previous Siemens role where I didn't have a team member. Like, I was just the only one being responsible for a huge scope. And so I didn't have much, or I personally didn't see opportunity to even complain or to be like, to say no, because I knew there's nobody else that can do this. Nobody else is like familiar with the scope. And even if I do say I'm completely overworked and I don't know how to handle this much anymore, there wasn't really an alternative because we had so many layoffs and it was just a really bad situation altogether. So I always question, does it even make sense to say no right now? Is there an alternative? Is there a different solution? And if I don't see one, I tend to just not say no and just deal with it and try to do the best.
Yeah. Yep. And you're so you're bringing up a couple things, Francisca, and then Brandy and Hillary will come to you two next. So Francisca, one of the things you said is, I don't want to complain. So make a note of this, every single one of you. When you are saying no, you are not complaining. Now, you can check in. Typically, again, the leaders we work with are high performing, and I'm certain if you work for Chris, with him as your manager, you are as well. And so when you are, here's something for you to start practicing. First of all, in your mindset, when you're saying no, you're not complaining. The second thing is, in your language, is to start speaking objectively and take I out of the equation. So for example, what was your role or title in that previous role?
Financial analyst.
Okay, so here's a way to practice objective language. This amount of work or this scope of work, if you were talking to your manager or someone, this scope of work or this project, in order to meet this deadline, in order to meet the May 28th deadline, requires 1.5 financial analysts. So what that means is we either reduce the scope of work or we move out the deadline, or we bring on another half of a financial analyst. So notice I'm being objective, and I'm not saying I'm saying it requires 1.5 financial analysts.
Yeah.
Because here's another way that we will tend to take on responsibility that's not ours. We as an individual employee will tend to take on responsibility for the business. And it's not, you're responsible to the business, not responsible for the business. And so when you said there was no other option, there are lots of other options. And you have a business who's making decisions. They're making decisions around resources, even if that means layoffs. And when they're making decisions around layoffs, they're making decisions around when certain projects are going to get completed. Because we are very much like a piece of equipment. We have capacity requirements.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I've said to managers in the past, is particularly when I was in the military, and there was never a shortage of things to do as the XO of an infantry company. So I'd work with the CO, company commander, and say, hey, all right, so we got this stuff. What's the most important thing to do? Because right now I got 17 things due Tuesday. That's not realistic. So to make sure I'm tracking, I'm seeing these things being most important. Like these are definitely due Tuesday. The rest of this, though, I'm not sure where this fits. And that way, at least I'm coming to him with hey, I want to make sure I'm responsible, make sure I'm doing the things that are going to really move the needle for us as an organization, keep us on track, make sure we're hitting our milestones and our deadlines. And these things are definitely in. This other stuff, though, where do you see this? Because I can see this being a maybe the next day or maybe the next month. And sometimes it helps people to reframe. They'll feel more comfortable going to manager instead of saying no. It can be yep, this part I've definitely got, and I've got this much capacity, and then there's this much stuff left. Now, which of these pieces are we going to start to stick in here so that we're hitting this and that we're doing what is going to be most important?
And there's something more subtle that Chris applies when you're talking to your manager, any of you. There's something more subtle in what he's exercising. And Chris, this will sound familiar. The more that you get in the practice of, we call it showing your plate. So if you've got a whiteboard, if you've got it
to-do list
on a piece of paper, it's being willing to literally make your work plan, your projects, your portfolio of work, make it more visible, and then use that as a tool to have these conversations. Because your manager is also, or a colleague is also probably running 100 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And they're in their own little world, and they don't remember all the things you're doing, even though you're thinking, you freaking know what I'm doing. They don't know. They don't remember.
Or you told me to do this. And they're like, yeah, I told you to do that 2 months ago. Yes. And it's fallen off my plate since then because I know you've got it and you always kick ass. So I'm not going to sweat it. So for them, it's fire and forget. They've just like, you've got this. I'm not going to sweat it anymore.
Yeah. So when they come to you with one more directive or one more project, you can say, okay, it sounds like that is higher priority than this and this. And then you check in with them, or you can say, adding that means this isn't going to get done, or this is going to get moved out. Where do you see the priorities? So the key is, some of us have a autopilot habit of saying yes, because we think that's what we're supposed to do. And now this exercise of having an exchange and asking questions are a very important tool for when you're getting more added, and then that showing of your plate, turning it into a collaborative prioritizing exercise. Hillary, what were you going to bring up?
I'm going to say that at our little small company that we have now from the COVID downsize is that it's important to be a team player. And if someone asks for help, everyone volunteers no matter what they have on their plate. Instead of, if you are swamped and busy and you can't take it, but it's still important, I think in everyone's eyes, that you're volunteering and you're saying you'll help, even if you don't have time for it. Sometimes there's talk on the back end about people that don't volunteer and don't help, talk negatively at the company.
So that's a fantastic example, Hillary, and really glad you brought that up, because that probably is something a lot of people feel, whether they can put their finger on it in quite that descriptive of a way or not. And one way to say really honestly, so that you're helping both yourself and others recognize it, is just like Kathy said, to the degree of showing your plate. You can say, it would be irresponsible of me to jump in and volunteer time that I simply don't have to spend on this other thing because I've got these other priorities. And so then what you're doing is you're saying, hey, I want to help, and it doesn't make sense for me to say, I'll jump in and be a good team player, when in reality, my plate is full. My plate is already more than full. And so it would be a kind of a false narrative to go in that direction.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and here's some other language that all of you can use when you're in this type of situation. Well, first of all, here's one thing I want you to have in your mindset on this. You can say yes to the person and say no to the task. For example, what Ivan was saying is, you could say, Sam, I want to help you. I'm already overextended doing what Ivan said, show your plate. So I don't want to volunteer and then let you down.
Yeah.
How else could I help? Or don't even ask that question. You could also say, please keep me in mind for the next opportunity.
Yeah.
Or when I get some of these off my plate, I'll come and check in with you, because I want to help you. We're all overextended. I want to help you wherever I can. So you're saying, you're strengthening the relationship, and you're saying yes to the person, saying no to to doing that specific thing.
Yeah, that's great.
Good. And so keeping an eye on time, a couple of things I'll make sure we're clear on is that we talk about some of these tools. So one of them we've hit on is can think of it as swapping. So I'll do X and then we'll postpone Y. So that's some of what we've kind of hit on, is to say, if something is more important, or a manager says, hey, please do X by Tuesday, and you're thinking, holy smokes, I'm already filled up. Hey, I'll do that. I recommend that we push this other thing till Wednesday. So you're right there negotiating and saying yes, without just saying, yeah, just keep throwing more on the plate. I'll just run faster on that hamster wheel for longer and it'll be awesome. Because that's not awesome. So there's a swapping option. The second option is also the time piece. So you may say, hey, I'd love to help with that. I have time on my calendar, and starting in about 3 weeks, or starting in 4 days, whatever it is. So what you're doing is you're saying yes, and you're not saying yes right now. You may say, yes, I want to support that when I have some availability and my calendar opens up in the future. So those are the first. I want to make sure that we identify those and put some kind of labels on them. So as you guys think about these tools, you can go, oh, I'm going to be swapping, or I want to say yes later.
The also, as we covered with Francisca, the objective language, and on language, Heather put something in the chat. She said the power of and Heather, share more about what you had in mind on that piece of language around saying no and setting boundaries.
Sure. So instead of saying but, say and. I think it helps people fully pay attention to the entire thing you're saying, instead of focusing on what comes after but. That's what I've been noticing. So if you say, I don't have time for that right now, but I could get to it in 4 days, versus I don't have time for that right now, and I'm really glad you came to me, or something like that. It's almost a completely different meaning, but you're saying the same thing, really. I mean,
no, you're saying something very different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people clue into it differently. They hear but, and they just only listen to the last half, is what I've been noticing.
Yeah. Or even sending a different message you may not intend. What you have is really important, but I don't have time for that right now. So
Yes.
Yeah.
what you have is not important to me at all. So yeah, take that and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's the message you
Yeah,
made.
that's exactly it. That's what I meant to say.
Intentionally.
And it's perfect, Heather, that you're bringing it up because I forget about some of these basics. But so that the rest of you know, but is actually a word that we have on our illegal words list. Completely remove it from your vocabulary. A lot of people are in the habit of saying it, and then it sends an unintentional and unwanted message. Not just to the other person, it sends an unwanted message about you. When you're saying, another thing, but this or but that, you come across whiny also. And that's you're not conveying your competence or confidence or personal leadership.
So one to bring in them, keeping an eye on the time. We got about 4 minutes left. One other tool you can say is if someone brings something to you and you're like, oh, I want to help you, but I don't have time. That's what you're thinking. You may say, I want to help, and that sounds like a big project. I've got X amount of time. So what can I do with this amount of time to support you? So when you begin to say, I can spend 2 hours on this or whatever it is, I can devote X amount of time to this. Now you're giving them a time frame to put that in. If you know something about the task where you know how long it takes, you may say, yeah, I'll take 3 of those reports and I'll write those. So now what you're doing is you're getting clear on how you're going to commit your time to that.
One last thing on language. In addition to being more objective, using language that's more objective, like financial analyst rather than I can't get all this done. Use language that's declarative. So we have a whole list of what we call bubble wrap. That's just that's completely unproductive and counterproductive and cluttery language. So when you are going into this collaborative prioritizing, maybe with your manager or some collaborative building of a solution on how you're going to help. If you're in the habit of saying, well, I think we can do this, or I think maybe I could do that, or it's how you unknowingly overcommit yourself because you're not you're not conveying that you're more decisive and clear and knowing about it. I want to give one last tool because Ivan's pointing out the time. One last tool for every single one of you when you have any request, whether it's personal or on the work side, or even a directive from your manager or from a colleague. Your new tool is to ask a minimum of 1 question. I want to say minimum of 2, a minimum of 2 questions.
That aren't yes, no questions.
That are not yes, no questions. So examples, where does this line up in our current list of priorities? Where is the pressure coming from since we have these other priorities?
What happens if we accomplish this a week later?
Yeah.
That can be one where sometimes people don't think about, oh, well, if we do this, awesome. If we do it a week later, it really doesn't affect anything. So the world isn't going to explode.
So even if you, and there's,
of
course, advancing questions are a core component of the Wingspan performance system. So that's a whole other thing, though. At a minimum, if you commit to, I'm going to ask at least 1 question, what that does is it's going to help you stop habitually saying yes and then regretting it later.
One other question, and you scratch this one down. This is the 3rd or the 4th tool I had, is what part. So if your manager or someone else brings you something and you're thinking, gosh, I've got this much space left on my plate and this project is this much, and there's no way that's going to fit. Like that's just not realistic. Is you may say to them, hey, I'm happy to help with this. Which one part or which 2 pieces of this do you want me to do? Or which 2 pieces of this am I best suited for helping with? So now you're saying yes, and also keeping it in a limited capacity. So it's not, I'll do the whole darn thing. It's, yeah, I'll help with these 1 or 2 spots. So that could be another thing to bring in.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh my gosh.
You still avoid why here, right?
Yes.
You wouldn't.
Yeah. So Heather's bringing up why is not an advancing question. So here, whatever question you come up with, 1 or 2 questions you'll commit to practicing, make sure they start with who, what, how, when, or where. That's a total crash course.
Yeah.
Who, what, how, when, or where. Just make sure that your questions start with those. So real quick, as we wrap up, what's something that you really appreciated from today, and that you're going to commit to practicing?
I can go. I think the prompt Kathy gave about what does this cost you?
Mm.
Because I noticed when people around me get really stressed. So there's 2 of us working out of the home right now.
Mhm.
We don't take lunch breaks. We don't get outside and take a breath of fresh air. We don't refill our water. We're not eating. We're not taking care of our basic selves. And how can we perform if everything we're doing is costing us in some way? How do we refill or refresh? So that really has stuck with me this whole session.
Yeah. And your
really
value isn't sitting there chained to your laptop. Your value is performing in your personal performance zone. Good.
Really good.
Who else?
I would say that Chris does a pretty good job at explaining to us if we're overwhelmed to communicate it. And, you know, there's no repercussions. It's like, let's just do as much as we can handle, but not overwhelm ourselves. So just kind of the reinforcing behaviors of what we should be doing. Like Heather was saying, it's very easy to get behind your laptop and computer and realize, wow, I've been working for 6 hours, haven't stopped once, haven't gone outside. So just kind of those like reinforcing appropriate behaviors versus what you may be doing as you leave the performance zone and enter stress or autopilot zone.
And that's an important place for all of you on that team, all of you to support each other. How are you making sure to take breaks?
Mm-hmm.
Just that one simple question, really help each other to take care of yourselves. Good. Who else? Josh, what do you got?
I like the follow-up question when you're getting a task. I think that's a good way to sort of categorize what kind of priority it needs to be, or maybe if you could get other people involved.
Really good. Yeah, the who else, that could even be a 5th question. Like, who else can help with this, or who else can support parts of this? That's a really good ad, Josh.
I like the rephrasing of when someone asks you to do something you don't have time, how to say, I'd love to help you, however, or
And
yeah.
I love to help you, and I'm already overcommitted.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll say your comment about the 2-word check-in throughout the day. I know we always start our mornings off with the 2-word check-in in our text group, but I don't do a great job circling back with that. And then also, Bobby, your comment, super appreciated. But one thing it definitely makes me do is I may promote within the team to give me the full disclosure about where your workload lies, but I do not do that with my boss or anyone else. So making sure I'm asking those 2 questions when urgent priorities come down the pipeline to figure out what the true necessity is.
And now the rest of you are better equipped to support Chris in more powerful ways around when he's in that position of getting overwhelmed by requests.
Yeah. That could sound like, hey, Chris, you sound like you got a lot on your plate. What are you saying no to today? Or what are you going to go back and renegotiate?
Yeah. Or how can we help you build the case to what information is important to say no to this? Or yeah. So now you guys can be much stronger partners to support your manager. Really good. Matt, how about you? Oh, you're on mute.
For me, it's asking what are the impacts of this to my team, because my assumption is that they would tell me what's already on the list that I'm bumping up against, versus me giving them an opportunity to prompt. Okay, if here I am adding another little stone on top of the stack, where is the rest of the stack about to fall apart? Without them saying, okay, here we go again.
I had a team member who he was a machine. The guy was absolutely amazing technically. And if I asked him to do something, he would just about always say yes. And so what I learned to do, then sometimes we would go someplace and he would do something. And I was like, hey man, how did it go last night? He's like, oh, great. I finished up about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, oh my God, that was not what I wanted. So what I learned to start to do was to say, hey, this is really important. Like, how does that actually work? Like, no BS. How does that really work with your schedule? Don't just say yes. Like, what else have you got on the plate? And that way I'm prompting him to say, well, I've got this, and this. And then sometimes I would say, okay, those things are way more important. Let's do this next week, or we'll figure out when else to do this. So that may be something else that works for you, Matt.
And Matt, when you're asking them that question, you're helping them build that muscle and so that they start to ask themselves. And communicate that.
Yeah.
So really good. The time just flew by. This was so good. Please continue to send us emails, things that you want us to cover in future sessions. Heather wrote something in the chat.
Oh, gotcha.
Other things you want us to. I want to thank Chris and his team actually, because and Matt Hubert. So the combination of Chris and Matt is what prompted us to decide to do the live open session on this topic. So thank you guys very much. And
I showed up.
And if you guys have friends or coworkers or family members, or you run into some folks this weekend and they're saying, gosh, I've got so much, please share some of the Wingspan emails with them, share some of this information with them. Yeah. And we've got a lot on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and we'll be certainly adding more over time. So
yeah.
And
thanks also for making this a fantastic session, everyone.
Yeah, your participation was awesome.
Yeah, have a fantastic weekend.